Now that you've seen a simple example of what an ASP.NET page looks like and how it works, let's go step back just a second. I want to give you a real brief overview of the .NET framework because I realize that for some of the folks watching this video, you might be new to it. The .NET framework was announced a couple of years, a little more than 2 years ago now, by Steve Ballmer, and it really shocked everybody because Microsoft is making a really significant departure from their previous methodology when it comes to development, software development. It is an entirely new way of thinking. This thing assumes disconnected clients, which means where in the past references to our variables were by reference, they're now by value, which means we're not maintaining contact with these variables. Microsoft realized as they looked at how development was growing up, at how computers are being used, that most of the time clients tend to connect to a server, grab the information they need, and then disconnect. And of course, that's the heart of the internet, stateless communication. We hit the web server, we request our information, we break our connection, and we go on. We may go to a totally different page, a totally different website. And so this idea of record sets, where there was a constant connection maintained and this constant back and forth to the server, was very expensive and was not very efficient. And so with the .NET world, everything is assumed to be a disconnected type session. We hit the server, we get our information, we disconnect from it. The .NET framework also brings us true object orientation. Now, the C folks have had that for quite a while, and they've been kind of rough on us. They beat us up a little bit on the VB world about object orientation. VB had some object-oriented features, but it wasn't a true object-oriented language. That has now come to .NET. In .NET, you're going to notice as we go through here and look at some examples, and I realize this is not a .NET course or a .NET framework course, but I think you need to kind of get a grasp on this. But in Visual Basic, everything is now an object. Everything out there derives from certain objects. Every object derives from the system namespace, the system.object namespace. And so we now have true object orientation. This is what's driving a lot of the ads that you're seeing about the .NET framework, where companies are saying we switched to .NET and we dropped 45,000 lines of code. They still have the same functionality, but things like inheritance and interfaces and so forth have allowed them to save code. The next characteristic of the .NET framework is it is large. It is huge. There are a lot of functionalities already built in. All we have to do is instantiate objects off of the classes that are there and just simply use the functionality. In a lot of cases, these things are shared, which means we don't have to instantiate objects. We can just use the functionalities and the methods and the properties and so forth. So there's quite a bit. Now, this will be a bit daunting at first when you first look at the .NET framework. There's so many namespaces and classes out there. But just keep in mind, this is just like everything else you've always learned and know about computers. Start, find your little place you're comfortable, begin to work at it, and as you need more and more functionality, you'll kind of get out there and look around. You'll pick up and understand more and more and more about the .NET framework, and this does tend to pile on. The more you learn, the easier it gets to learn more. The .NET framework is faster, easier, better. In the upcoming video, I'm going to do a little diagram, a little animation on exactly how it works. But suffice it to say for now that the framework runs faster than competing technologies such as Java. It runs much more efficiently in a disconnected environment. It's much easier to program that environment because .NET handles some of the concerns for you, and just all around it's better. Very few people have looked at the .NET framework and walked off and said, "No, I just don't think it's what I need." That's not been the issue. It may have been expense in the economy in which we find ourselves now. It may have been competing technologies, and for some people it's just been a reluctance to move to a new technology in Microsoft too early. But this thing is absolutely positively faster, easier, and better than before. The .NET framework is highly organized. With just a little bit of reading and studying on this thing, you can really begin to feel kind of intuitive about where you need to go to get what kind of information. For example, system.data namespace handles your ADO information. system.web.ui handles your user interface on web pages and so forth. And you'll see as you dig into this thing, it's very easy to find your way around. And again, it looks a bit intimidating at first, but after you're in it just a very short time, it actually starts to feel pretty cool. One thing that's new to most VB people is the use of namespaces. And a namespace is simply a collection of classes. Now, earlier, a few years back, we were told to collect our lines of code in subroutines. And then we began to collect our subroutines into classes. And so now this is the next step. We're collecting our classes into namespaces. For example, in the system.data namespace holds that contains the classes that we use for all of our data issues, connecting to databases and reading those databases and updating them and so forth. And so most of that functionality has been programmed for us, and this is true black box encapsulation, abstraction kinds of issues with this code, because we can simply instantiate an object off a class, call a method, pass some arguments to that method, and whoosh, something magic happens. We don't have to understand what happened on the inside. We don't have to know anything about API calls that may have been made for that to happen. It just happened. And so this makes it very easy to reuse code and so forth. We can build our own classes, our own namespaces. We'll touch on that very briefly a little bit later on in some of our web examples with our web pages. So that's the .NET framework. Now, I've just taught you enough right there to really be confused about the .NET framework, to really just kind of whet your appetite for it. So I would strongly advise you to go out and download the .NET Framework SDK that has tutorials, examples, a lot of documentation, and just kind of begin to kind of just peruse through this and become familiar with it. And then as you begin to use it, the cracks fill in pretty quickly.